Okay, so what do men do to deserve this? So I want to talk about this because it relates to some of the stuff I was just talking about with Alice, of course, overlaps with some broader discussions about the state of men. And, whether you like it or not, I know that demographically, like 85% of the people who watch my channel are men. It is what it is. So this is the thing that matters. Look at this first line: bald, white, and jacked. As Meatloaf once said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Is an action figure of the tech and finance overclass, an angel investor, best-selling author, personal finance guru. He podcasts constantly. The Prof G Pod, the Pivot Pod, Raging Moderates Pod with Fox News personality. For someone of this ubermensch milieu, he's surprisingly progressive and self-aware. In recent years, he's been a leading evangelist for a notion that rapidly solidified into conventional wisdom. America's young men are in crisis. And this is a thing we've heard from lots of people, not just Scott Galloway. The idea being that there is a crisis amongst men in America. I'll say two things at the outset, and we'll get into this. I both think it is true that we can talk about a crisis of men in as much as, by a lot of metrics, men in America aren't doing so well and that they seem to be struggling. And I think that we can even see this through trends in media and culture. I think that's a real thing. On the other hand, I think that looking at gender in that way as an over-determining factor allows us to overlook a lot of the actual structural factors that could be at play here. And even we talked about Gooners earlier or a couple weeks ago, but the gooning crisis is a thing that's not just about men being lonely or men searching for spiritual transcendence in the goon state. It's also about, men and young people in general being socially and economically alienated. We live in a country right now, America, that's where I'm, in case you didn't know, where they're talking about 50-year mortgages for homes. 50-year mortgages for homes because people can't afford homes. So rather than public housing, rather than finding ways to make housing cheaper, it's like, oh, we'll just do 50-year mortgages, which basically mean, depending on your interest rate, you're going to spend a bazillion times more than the house itself and be an indentured servant to a bank for your whole life. To be really reductive here, when I'm basically saying, I think a lot of problems boil down to the fact that more and more, and not just in housing, but in a variety of areas of life, we are all renters, and there is very little opportunity for forms of cultural, economic, social ownership that we associate with power or success. So back to Galloway. He pulls from a heavily circulated set of statistics. Female students outnumber males at colleges 3-2. Among young adults, men are more likely than women to live with their parents. It's because our parents like us better. By their mid-30s, more than 15% of men will still live with their folks. And for me, that's the most, a stat like that is the most striking, right? How many men who are in their 30s, and first of all, nothing wrong with that, but how many men who are in their mid-30s who live with their parents also have the financial resources to have their own place? It's nice to imagine a world where we're all in the Matthew McConaughey, Zoe Deschanel, Bradley Cooper, and Sarah Jessica Parker vehicle Failure to Launch, which stars Terry Bradshaw and Kathy Bates as well. Fun movie if you've not watched Failure to Launch. It's one of those movies you watch if you're out of town and you're in a hotel and you just have bad cable and it's on the USA Network and you're like, I guess I'm locking in to watch Failure to Launch. But I don't think it's a failure to launch issue. I think it's simply they couldn't pay. At times that I have lived at home for a bit or lived with a bunch of roommates I didn't like and all sorts of stuff. It's not because I wanted to. It's simply because I couldn't pay to do it. And not only are wages lower and opportunities lower, housing is more expensive. So I don't know. Some of this is just Why do we have to make everything so complicated? Um, yeah, I mean, Connor in the chat area says, still have my parents 35, no resources. Yeah, like, again, if you have cool parents and they have room, like, why not? And I do think it's a thing we're kind of weird about culturally. Like, I'll say this, for example, if I ever have a house with a good amount of rooms in it, my house now is pretty small. My daughter's old and there's room for her to live there and she like wants to. Hell yeah, dude, why not? I assume she's still going to be cool as shit when she's older. So why not? If living with me helps you get going, great. But I would also like her to be in a position where she didn't have to. You know, that's just what I'm saying. Compared to less than 9% of men die by suicide at about 3.5 times the rate women do. I mean, there's one of those things that is cultural and economic. We do live in a culture where if you're a man and you have feelings, that makes you a little bitch. If you're a man and you're depressed, you're actually just a pussy, I think. I don't think that I take antidepressants and go to therapy and cry while listening to music. But you know, we live in a world where, like, I'm of the first generation of men in my family who have been able to openly go to therapy, and even in that case, I sometimes feel a little bit weird about it. But along with that, let's say that I'm not a toxic millennial. Let's say that I'm a younger man who is aware that my mental health isn't doing so well. Well, fuck, man. Even if you're on a healthcare plan in this country, many of which are just getting 3 times more expensive, at least in terms of premiums. If you're in the chat and you've had this experience, anyone ever tried to find a therapist or a psychiatrist in America that's covered by your health insurance? It's pretty tough. You tried getting diagnosed for mental illness and getting treatment for it in a way that makes sense and you can afford. It's pretty tough, you know? And if you've done this in a culture that's so alienating and isolating, it's hard to just connect with other human beings. So I'm just saying, Connor, my man, you're speaking to my heart. I mean, I wasn't able. Again, we know that we're going to have TMI time at various points on the stream. I feel like I do need a graphic that's like TMI time. But I wasn't able to get some pretty significant diagnoses until I was in my like mid to late 30s because I had to go to an out of network psychiatrist that I then like paid money. You pay money and then you submit the bill to insurance and you hope they pay for some of it, yada, yada, yada. But that's like hard to do. And I'm lucky that I was able to get to that point in my life kind of functionally. Men's real wages are lower for the 10 to 15 percentiles of earners than they were in 1979. Neoliberalism, chief. Currently, the unemployment rate of young men with bachelor's degrees between the ages of 23 and 30 is close to double of their female peers. I mean, and some of that too is like, there's another article about this that maybe we'll get to later that I saw in, I think it's a New York magazine that's called "What is Gen Z supposed to do when AI takes entry level jobs?" But that's part of it as well. A lot of the jobs that people have been told to prepare for or get ready for don't exist or exist less than they have in a while. Gavin Newsom, governor of California, put out a podcast where he talked to Charlie Kirk, who said that Gen Z is the most alcohol addicted, most drug addicted, most suicidal, most depressed, most medicated generation in history. I don't think that's true. I thought the whole thing is that you young people don't drink. Kirk said that the message they're receiving is you're not going to have the same American dream that your parents would have. Conservative organizers saw this as an opportunity for Trump, manosphere, blah, 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 blah. The idea there being that the messaging of men's lives sucking and being hard are things that have are sort of like anxieties that the authoritarian right is built on. And there's a trend here, like fascists have always done this. I want to call out Sean in the chat right now. It says, most of my issues I talk with a therapist are problems with capitalism. Yeah, I made a video when I was like first starting this channel that no one really watched, and that's fine. It's fine. That's about that question because, so many of the I mean, it's almost like what anyone should do to really get diagnosed with any mental health issue is for 6 months, you should just get a living wage, like guaranteed wages. And once you alleviate economic anxiety, it's like, what's still there? You know? And like, that's the real thing. That's the real, like, what's still there then, you know? Um, it says Newsom, who wants to be the next president, was listening closely. He put out an executive order intended to confront California's growing crisis of connection and opportunity for men and boys. A week later, former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel published an op-ed that said young men ain't doing so good. And it says, like Newsom, Emanuel is doing what a certain kind of Democrat does best, triangulating. And I think part of this is like, I don't want to be too cynical here, but part of this is an issue of all the men voted for the other guy and his people in recent elections. How do we get the men to be on our team? And I think one of the solutions to that is acknowledging that what they are feeling is real. You could also say that a part of it is, tied into the sort of like men's content manosphere ecosystem as well. That's a sort of cultural community that is affirm those sorts of things. And in a lot of ways, and it's really what we were talking about with Alice earlier, when people talk about a Joe Rogan of the left, they're really just saying like, who is a leftist figure that young alienated men could coalesce around, and they'll tell them to vote for Democrats rather than Republicans. But it's interesting here that both the right and the left, or at least prominent men in the right and the left, agree on this and are using it as an electoral strategy. And there was an article in the New York Times last week that did something similar in arguing that one of the reasons, or one of the reasons that Mamdani won in New York was because of a loneliness crisis, and the way in which his campaign spoke directly to that, both in their policy and in their strategy of organizing. This article says that some Democrats want a centrist manosphere of their own, like Abundance Bros, and Notes on Being a Man, and that's the book. Galloway, who has expressed bullishness on the presidential prospects of both Newsom and Emanuel, declares that discontented members of Gen Z and the boys and teens of Gen Alpha need an aspirational vision of masculinity, a vision opposed to the misogynist messaging that's epitomized by people like Andrew Tate and Nick Fuentes. I like this line a lot. Part self-help memoir and part dudes rock polemic, the book presents a capitalist letter. Capital. That was a little unconscious slip there. Men protect, provide, and procreate. Don't love that. I don't love that as triple P's. If you can think of a better triple P for what men should be, put it in the chat or the comments. Would love to hear it. Make it appropriate. But I don't know, like tying into the notion that men protect seems to play into the kind of toxic fantasy of men like beat up people who are bad. And I get it. I'm toxic. I have that in my brain. Provide, the primary, like what's, in a sense, if men protect, provide, and procreate. Wait, is this? I'm going to keep reading because maybe I'm wrong. Evan said piss pinata Pokemon. That's so good. That's so good. Piss pinata Pokemon. But then Alex actually gets it with penis, penis, penis. But what in that would Charlie Kirk, rest in power, disagree with? Masculinity can be expressed simply by getting up at fucking 6 a.m. and going to work and doing shitty work such that you can protect your family economically. And the evolved man also ensures that he does not slack off domestically or emotionally or logistically, leaving his partner to ask in Galloway's signature demotic, okay, boss, what the fuck are you bringing to the table? It's one of those things where he's like a rich, business influencer, podcaster, NYU professor who says fuck so that he's not like the other boys or something like that. Okay, so the question to ask here, again, is like, in this capitalist letter credo, I'll just say that right now, what that he is arguing for, I phrased that poorly, but what part of what he's arguing for right here doesn't neatly fit with the, let's be Jamesonian for a second, the cultural logic of late capitalism, or the cultural logic of too late capitalism? Because in many ways, let's be even more crass, basic Marxist here, right? Thinking about base and superstructure, um, the way in which cultural ideologies and practices often serve the interest of a material or economic base, like getting up at 6 a.m. and doing shitty work to protect your family, like all of this fits the logic of the exchange and the exploitation of labor for the sake of fueling an economy that doesn't benefit you. When he says doesn't slack off domestically, emotionally, or logistically, what are you, fucking FedEx? None of this seems to acknowledge that you could be a man and, like, I don't know, maybe you want to sit alone and like read books or paint. There's the SNL sketch about the sad boy at the well that I would pull up if NBC Universal wouldn't get mad at us for doing it. I'll go back to some of your guys' triple P's later. I really appreciate those. If you're watching this after the fact, leave them in the comments. The good man of the reasonable center, in Galloway's view, adheres to a code indistinguishable from the Boy Scouts. Mental and physical fitness. And let's just be fair here. Like, that's good. Don't hear me getting too reactionary. It's good to be mentally and physically fit. Am I either? Who knows? Emotional resilience. Resilience I struggle with, both literally and as a concept. When I was an academic in the last instance, or when I was last an academic, it was a theme the university would talk about. It was like emotional resilience. And I remember at a faculty meeting with my fellow philosophy professors, we were kind of laughing at the idea that the university's resilience protocol was kind of saying, like, do better at letting capitalism have its way with you. Like lay down and take it, basically. So when we talk about emotional resilience, I worry that sometimes that creates a logic of like, well, I'm being exploited at work, but I got to be resilient, or I'm being mistreated by a landlord or boss, or whatever. Well, it's my job to be resilient. Like, so much of this, again, plays in to an individualist logic where the primary role is to make oneself the best individual actor in a specific system. Hard work, again, hard work, but for what? I think that, to put on my Aristotle hat for a second, like working hard and trying to be virtuous at the things we do is good. And I do think there's something essentially human about a type of non-exploitative labor. The risk, again, is if we just make hard work a fundamental value, what are we doing that's different from the Protestant work ethic that appropriated a certain version of, Protestant Lutheran Christianity to get more people in Western Europe to go to the factories all day? Like, I don't know what's different about that. Financial prudence. Okay. Caring for others. Yeah. Caring for others rips. No notes. No notes on caring for others. It says few could object to any of this. Oops. But the person who describes it seems blessedly gender free. So why make this about manhood? Interesting point. Because again, he doesn't have anything there that says like mental and physical fitness, emotional resilience, good penis, hard work, financial prudence, testicles, caring for others. Like, there's none of that. So anyone could do this. Sorry for drinking water. I know that some people, every time people leave comments about that, there's a sad man in a circle. That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion. Who sang it? Let me know in the chat. There's no question that the generations-long erosion of the U.S. manufacturing base and the diminution of the unionized pension jobs that the sector offered disproportionately harmed working class men. I mean, that's true. That's true. It was bad for men when they had jobs in unions, and then you said they couldn't. Ongoing industrial collapse has shaped many of the statistics that are central to this discourse. Yet, if you tilt some of the most commonly cited data points this way, you can just as easily argue on the behalf of a woman crisis, a man crisis, or perhaps, here we go, most accurately, for an ongoing multi-directional crisis affecting us all. What? A crisis affecting us all. Holy crap. It's almost like it's almost like by doing this, we're avoiding making this a larger societal, cultural, and economic issue that would lead us to think about the system as a whole, bridge divides between our certain gender and culture identities, and realize that the system is bending us all over and making us take it. So maybe rather than being resilient, we need to be resistant. We need to get together and figure out ways to fight this. Maybe that's a thing we could do. Maybe that's a thing that we could do, you know? Again, shout out to Alice Capello, who was on earlier, because I think she basically said a version of that in what she was describing. The college gender gap, for instance, could be evidence of a rudderless, demoralized generation of young men, but might also be the product of differing economic incentives. Because if you're a boy, you can just be a streamer or an influencer. You can just be a boy streamer or a boy influencer. I mean, like literally think about that. I went to college for like a decade, and then I'm just doing this. I'm kidding. It was worth it. I read books. I learned stuff. We basically said women need more education to earn the same amount of money as men, and that the less education a worker has, the more this gender gap widens. This also gets at the myth of data, the way in which a certain type of person sees numbers on a chart, and then they say, great, the numbers on this specific chart facilitate the thing that I want to be true. So now I'm going to make this thing true because I'm going to say that the numbers on the chart say that the thing that I want to be true is true. I think that's what Galloway is doing here, where the author of this piece in the New Yorker, I forgot their name, we'll go back at the end and make sure you have credit. The author of this piece is just going a level deeper and saying, well, why? You know what I mean? Like, let's not just say, well, less men go to college and more women do. Girls are good and boys are bad. Maybe it's the case that economically women need more education to earn the same amount. Maybe that's part of it. Suicide gender gap is narrowing. That's good. Well, I guess that's not good. I just want this. Maybe just no suicides. That'd be great. Women's wages overall are still 17% lower than men's, and the same asymmetry helps to explain the unemployment gender gap amongst younger adults. Healthcare is the source of most labor force growth in the U.S., and it's the women who are taking most of those jobs. Yeah, we know that fields like nursing and home care and childcare, low wage work in many cases. I know nursing is able to offer some pretty solid careers to people, and like Veterans Day, shout out to all the nurses, shout out to all the care workers, shout out to the social workers, shout out to the teachers, shout out to all of you. Well, we've done this thing in society, of course, where it's like, all those jobs that those jobs you have to take care of people so that they learn and live. Yeah. And that they get like mental recuperation. Yeah. Let's let the ladies do those. They can wear ball gowns and still do those jobs or something. But it's good because we don't have to pay them as much. We don't have to pay them as much if it's a girl job. Because like teaching is like a girl job. So since it's a girl job, you don't have to pay them that much. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what we're getting at here. And that's ridiculous. So even unemployment among Black women is up, even with that going on, because they were overrepresented in federal agencies that were decimated by the Doge, and labor force participation among women with children is down because of rising childcare costs and the kinds of strict return to office policies endorsed by the Trump administration. Okay. So early in the piece, also, that's amazing that you work in elementary school in Flint, Michigan, doing anything in elementary school rips. And hey, at least like you're represented. Elementary school janitors are represented in Abbott Elementary as pretty silly fun guys. But yeah, I think at our most basic, we can see here that a lot of the logic being expressed in this article, a lot of the arguments being made, or the arguments in the book, which in fairness, I haven't read, maybe I'll grab a copy, are pretty shallow. So let's see. So there's some practical proposals that have emerged to make the boys okay again. Teaching and the teaching and nursing professions are facing serious labor shortages. Jobs don't come with big paychecks and are often grueling, but they're also resistant to automation and relatively recession proof. I don't know. What if we paid people decent money to do those? You know what I mean? What if we said, hey, teaching and nursing, things we need in society that are necessary, that can't be automated yet, that involve working with other human beings, that involve a number of skills depending on what you're into. What if we made it to where those jobs paid decently? What if we even had a federal program? I'm going to get crazy right here now. I'm going to go full Chairman Mao on your asses. But what if we had a program that was like, hey, if you commit to this many years of nursing or teaching, we're going to pay for you to go to college. We'll subsidize housing if you move to a more expensive city, blah, blah. What if we just like actually made pathways to do that? I can't tell you, and I'm sure some of you are in the chat right now or watching this later. I can't tell you how many people I know who are like, I wish I could be a teacher, but A, the jobs don't pay a lot, and B, in many places, it's hard to get a job as a teacher. Like, what if we just made it easy for people to, what if we just made it easy for people to do shit like that? So let's see. Yeah. Of Boys and Men, Richard Reeves wrote that we need to break the cycle of professions taught by women for women. Paul Krugman said on his Substack, Paul Krugman, great guy, friend of the program. Many of these occupations are female coded and have become so over time because they're underpaid, blah, blah, blah. Women, it should be noted, have dominated the teaching profession since the 19th century, not because it's a misandrous job protection racket, but because the early public education advocates found that they could expand the school system more quickly by hiring women teachers who they could pay less than men. I don't want to be a broken record, but it's almost like there's often really good, like, economic and material reasons that help us actually explain stuff and understand it. And then when we understand things at the material level, the solutions are often a lot more actionable and straightforward than like, we need like an anomalous cultural program where like, this is something I'm going to call this right now. Save this clip and you can bring it up in however many years. I think before we have like a federal jobs program or like a Green New Deal that creates jobs or some sort of national teaching nursing force or whatever, the Democrats will be like, we're starting a new podcasting program for men. It's going to be a government funded podcast program where we're going to make podcasts for men and we'll sign them with podcast mentors. Like they will try content before they try like socialized medicine and education. You know what I mean? They'll try to do that before they do that. Before you ever get subsidized housing or the ability to go see a mental health professional without paying $500 out of pocket, before any of that happens, it will be like, we've started a new democratic streaming channel on Twitch just for young men. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. Nice to see you guys here. Nice to talk about this. One might ask if difficult essential work might be well paid at this moment in history, regardless of the person's sex. But then here we go. But much of the centrist manosphere's rhetoric is predicated on refusing to see half of what's in front of you. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. That line again. Much of the centrist manosphere's rhetoric is predicated on refusing to see half of what's in front of you. This is good. This is a good piece. This is a good piece. It's doing a lot of the work for me. Newsom's executive order concerning men and boys acknowledges the strong correlation between social media usage and mental health disorders, but it doesn't note that these effects manifest in girls at significantly higher rates. And notes on being a man, be a man. Galloway writes, let's see, the deliberate transfer of wealth from the young to the old in the United States over the past century has led to unaffordable and indefensible costs of education and housing and skyrocketing student debt, all of which directly affect young men. True, but it affects everyone. And like, what is the reason for making it a gender specific argument? Like, what is that doing? What is it accomplishing? I don't know. Let's see. I'm going to skip ahead. The ambassadors of the centrist manosphere praise women's advancement and the feminist cause while insisting that men's economic and vocational anxieties are more naturally potent. I mean, that's the thing as well. Part of this is sort of like, hey, ladies, we know that stuff has been just shit for you for a while. We know that things have been shit with you for a while, almost ever. but things are kind of not good for us right now. So we're going to need to take it. We're going to need to take things over. We're going to need to make it about us. And I'm not trying to do some self-hating man thing here, because I think if you are a young man who feels alienated or isolated, I'm a not so young man that feels those things. There are very good societal and economic reasons for that we can locate and talk about. But doing it at the exclusion, doing it in a way that like highlights how it's extra bad for men, just doesn't sit right with me. It says this ambivalence reveals the weakness of their side. The right-wing manosphere knows that masculinity is a series of dominant signals beamed from behind iridescent Oakleys and the wheels of the most enormous pickup truck you've ever seen. It's a smirking Miltimaire who destroys a young woman at a college-hosted debate. It's an AR-15 openly carried. Manliness in the Trump area, Susan Faludi has written, is defined by display value, which exhibits itself as a pantomime of aggrieved aggression. Upon the stage, men's biggest problem is feminism, and the solutions are straightforward: restrict reproductive rights, propagandize about traditional gender roles, etc. Yeah, I mean, if the centrist side of this is, hold on, ladies, it needs to be about us for a little bit, then the right-wing side of this is like, bitch, get in the kitchen and make babies. Me and the boys are getting in the truck and going to see Kid Rock. I don't know who the boys would see. It's probably not Kid Rock. Oh, it's probably that guy, the country singer, and all the songs have trap beats, and he threw a chair off it. Morgan Wallen? Morgan Wallen? Is that who the fella's like? I think it's probably Morgan Wallen who the fella's like. The squishier centrist side has no such certainty. So Galloway presents masculinity not as one side of a fixed binary, but a state of mind and a lifestyle. One, like, why do we have to make everything like this? Not everything has to be a brand. But if you want Burns Notice merch, I'll get it going soon. Men's biggest problem is a feeling, an unreachable itch, or a marrow deep belief. These guys just got to find the goon state that men should still rank above women in a social hierarchy. Because that does seem to be the root of a lot of this, right? At the root of a lot of this is the idea that, like, it's ontologically insufficient for men to not be number one. Like, it doesn't work or operate at a fundamental level if men aren't the big boys in charge, and that we need like our natural place back. So I think while for the far right, that might mean a literal type of authoritarian domination over this sort of like centrist masculine world, it means more of like a bureaucratic technocratic thing where we are back in like our proper position in power that's given to us, not that we have to go take it or something like that. um they want us to accept that women in the main are accustomed to being a little degraded, a little underpaid and ignored and dampened in their ambitions, but we can't do that. I would get sick, guys. If you degraded me, underpaid me, or ignored me, I would get sick. I would get physically ill. Don't do it. The female coded person, to borrow Krugman's terminology, may feel overwhelmed by childcare costs, ashamed that she can't acquire a mortgage, or hollowed out by long hours of his ICU nurse. But such feelings do not disturb the order of the universe. That's great. That's great. That's great stuff. I'm glad. I mean, you got to remember, like, this is not only the work of someone who's meant to be one of our public intellectuals, just like an NYU professor writing this book and making these arguments. This is someone who a lot of liberal leaders have put up as like one of their guys. You know, like, this book is getting attention. Any news source in the past week, I guarantee you, has written about this book. The Times pundit Ezra Klein, rest in power. Oh, he's still. Never mind. I read a wrong source. Has lately suggested that Democrats consider running anti-abortion candidates in red states. So, what the crisis of masculinity means is that women have to lose some rights in red states for the fellas. Sorry, ladies. Your ovaries, they're owned by the state now, a sort of Stalinist takeover situation. But this way, me and the fellas can get back to doing what we do best. lifting weights, crush and bruise, going through missed encounters ads on Craigslist and imagining that somehow they're all about us, thinking that somewhere out there's a longing that someone feels for us that gives our life a value, and knowing that at any point we must be the object of the desire of something external to mean that I have meaning, whether that's God or a sex worker named Shiloh that I met in Omaha. That's the vibe we're getting here. I don't love it. Also, good morning, Aoife. I think I saw her jump in the chat. Good morning, Australia. Oh boy. You need dad, Galloway, who has 2 sons, said on a recent podcast. Okay, so you also need, so we need dads, we need nuclear families. Wow. The dad's an authority figure. There are certain moments where my partner needs me to weigh in. I don't know if it's the depth of my voice, my physical size. Boys begin turning out their mom over time. Tuning out their mom. I was like, holy shit. Sorry, I misread that in such a way that made it sound like these boys were pimping out their mother. One might wonder how boys lose these frequencies. One might long for a deep voice to explain it. Yeah, again, it's like if we live in a society that creates a culture where men have a necessary source of power and where men are who we're supposed to look up to. Again, I'm going to reference the conversation I had with Alice Capel. If you weren't here earlier, you can go back and watch that. I'll put it up on Sideburns and you can see the conversation there as well. If you're only told to look up to men, if every business leader, political leader, athlete, superstar musician, whatever, is a man, then your entire unconscious conception of what power and what leadership is like, I gotta be a man. So like maybe that's the issue. It's sort of like naturalizing things. I think that's what a lot of this is. It's naturalizing contingent economic and social factors. I'm going to say it again because I think that's a good point. It's naturalizing contingent social, cultural, and economic factors. By that I mean this logic, the Galloway logic, the centrist be a man logic, shouts to Gaston, is taking things that exist but aren't necessary. I said necessary, weird, but things that exist but not necessarily. Things that are products of certain cultural and economic forces, and it's assuming that those things are natural because they are what exist. In the same way that for a lot of human history, this is going to get a little extreme, get ready for this. People were just like, oh yeah, slavery is like a thing. Well, why, Dad? Well, because there's slaves. People have been slaves. But couldn't they not be? Shut up. Like that's the cultural logic at play here with stuff like this. And that's that shit I don't like. In another book from this genre of Boys and Men, different than Boys to Men, Reeves quotes or references sociologist Jeff Dench, who posited that the fundamental weakness of feminist analysis is his failure to see that men may need the status of the main provider role to give them a sufficient reason to become fully involved and stay involved in the longer term draggy business of family life. Men will only be daddy. Men only want to be your daddy if they're the number one in charge person. This is insane. I don't like this. Kind of, yeah, I don't like this. This is further down in this article, and I will link this so you can read it for yourself. The deeper one sinks into our nation's alleged man-boy problem and its potential solutions, the more the women reader may begin to feel something stronger than resentment or intellectual disdain. She may begin to feel a chauvinistic gratitude in her sex. Chauvinistic gratitude in her sex. The familiar flatness of feeling a little degraded seems preferable to the anger, entitlement, and alienation that gnaws away at so many male specimens. What a gift it is really to have no choice in the matter. I mean, yeah, I think that's the thing too. Like a lot of this underlying ideology seems to naturalize the state that women find themselves in Western society, but grant a certain type of like existential freedom for men to ascend to these higher heights. I'm reading Galloway. One gets the sense that men last knew who they were about 75 years ago. Much as the Trump administration does when it vows to revive the coal industry or when it shares fascist light iconography that would be at home in a Paul Verhoeven film, Galloway Galloway appeals to the reader's nostalgia for mid-century peak male. This sounds like someone who, when they watched Mad Men, longed to be Don Draper, like looked at themselves and like, that should have been me. That should have been me. That wasn't the point of that show. If you watched Mad Men and you were like, this is aspirational, you missed the point. It was young men, he reminds us, who stormed the beaches at Normandy and who won the Battle of the Bulge. Like, I'll say this, you know who loves war and who loves these fetishized images of men at war? Guys that go to the gym and live in really nice apartments in New York and have fancy jobs and do like stocks. People that wouldn't bust a grape in a food fight fetishize or idolize warriors. You know, many people that I'm in the military are just like poor kids from places that suck, that don't have any other opportunities. Like anyone who writes like that, they should draft you. I don't believe in drafting, but if you're some guy and your whole worldview involves the fetishization of the military and of soldier life, you should get drafted. Put me in, coach. When Germans or Russians are streaming over the border from the beach, big dick energy isn't just a nice idea. It's fucking mandatory. Imagine writing that in a book. Imagine writing that line, typing that up and being like, yeah, daddy's got it. Daddy's got it with this one. Jesus Christ. Ugh. Go to a war, dude. Go do a war. Tell me about it. Of course, the German soldiers were young men too. But it's different. And it isn't clear which border Galloway thinks the Russians were crossing or if he realizes which sides they were fighting for. Yeah, I realized that when it says Germans or Russians, like, does he not realize we were on the same side as the Russians during World War II? Is this where we realized at no point in the fact check of publishing this book, someone was like, hey, Scott, that one, the Russians were, the Russians were actually the one that got in there and they were freeing the camps and stuff. No, we didn't. We came in later. No, that was them. Like, what are we doing? Also, if you write about big dick energy, you should have to put in your book the size of your penis. He also singles out 2 monumental building projects, the Hoover Dam and the Empire State Building. Cool. You got to build stuff. This book was published the same month as a book called Men at Work, which is not about the Australian band, the Empire State Building, and the untold story of the craftsman who built it. This says Kurtz unearths what he can of their lives. This is describing the men who built the Empire State Building, and finds plenty of evidence of what today we might call men in crisis, deaths of despair, dislocation of broken families, dependency. A carpenter named Finn Eglund, who was 30 years old, either jumped or fell from the Empire State Building as construction was wrapping. His death was ruled suicide. Another carpenter, Matthew McKean, had abandoned his wife and 2 children back in their home country of Scotland, and a stone setter in his 20s named James Kerr was still living with his mother. Fucking ending with some bars. This is from The New Yorker. It's by Jessica Winter. The piece is called What Do Men Deserve? Let me fucking nothing. Putting the link right there. I'll have a link in the description as well for anyone who watches this after the fact. Yeah. I just, again, what is any of this attempting to accomplish? Like, what is the end game here? And what are we doing when we rewrite history that way? In a sense, I'm always going to pull the Jameson thing. Sorry, it's where I'm at right now. It'll stop at some point. Always historicize things of that nature. The way that article ends, I think, gets at the ahistoricism of a view that fetishizes certain periods of history as times that were like rad and awesome for men that we need to capture. Like, so is the real point here? Is the real idea here that everything would be better if men were building dangerous buildings or fighting war? And this is written by a guy whose job is podcasting, and then he teaches sometimes. It's like when Ben Shapiro or Matt Walsh talk all big. It's like, dog, you are a content creator. You note how I rarely talk about how men need to be like soldiers and warriors. I read books and think about them, and then I try to make videos that are artistically gratifying where I express the ideas that were there. That's what I think. about this. That's what I think about that. Hey, thanks for watching this. In case you didn't know, I have a main channel where I post video essays and stuff like that. It's just called Michael Burns. There's a link. Would love for you to check that out. If you want to support the channel more, I have a Patreon. You can also hit up either of my beverage partners. There's Yes Please Coffee, who make the best gosh darn coffee in the world. You get 15% off with the code Burns Beans. And of course, my beloved new non-alcoholic beer sponsor, Years Beers. It's really good. There's a link below, and if you use it, you get 10% off your first order. So thank you so much. And if you ever want to watch these streams live, I'm live every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific. Okay, now the videos, now it's really over. So now you can go. I'm going to finish this. Now it's over. I'll see you guys for the next one.